All right, joining me now to talk about the bigger picture, my mentor, General Jack Keane, retired four-star and Fox News senior strategic analyst. As always, General Keane, thank you for helping us. I know we're all using your expertise, but you're the guy. Let me just ask you, how deep do you think Russia will go into the Ukraine? They've started on the border, and how deep do you reckon they're going to go?
Well, here's what I think is happening. It's coming into focus a lot better now than it did a few days ago. What Putin is conducting is a multi-phased military campaign that's very deliberate. So phase one has already taken place, and that is moving troops into the occupied breakaway regions. He's moved in the 8th Combined Arms Army, although he's denied actually having done that. And that's completed. Phase two is likely, as a result of the claim he made today, Larry, that the Donetsk and Luhansk republics, that their entire republics he lays claim to, not just the 1/3 that the separatists, Russian separatists, are occupying, and now his Russian forces are occupying. That means there's got to be an assault and military operations against that. And what will take place then, and he'll call the shots as to when, and that means there'll be pre-assault fires, air, missile, long-range artillery, rocket artillery, and then a mechanized and armor attack across the line of contact, likely simultaneously into both of those republics or regions, to lay ownership and occupation of them. Now, that's defended right now by Ukrainian military. It's heavily militarized, so that will be actually war, and that will be casualty producing. Phase three, I believe, is he's got a choice to make. Does he want to expand the Donbass occupation and carry it all the way down to a bridge to Crimea? That's only been one of their objectives, and that's on the menu for him to do. And then phase four is the thing that everybody has on their mind. He has a number of options dealing with Kyiv and the government itself in terms of the pressure he can put on it and topple that government and get a Ukrainian stooge in, much like Yanukovych was, to run the country. That's kind of where we are. We'll go through those phases. They appear to be deliberate, and he has choices to make considering each one and the success enjoyed with each one.
General Keane, do the Ukrainians start to fight back? I'm told by some reports there have been some skirmishes, but they're sort of in a pickle. If they do fight, Russia comes in harder. If they don't fight, they lose more ground. What is the position of the Ukrainian military?
Well, Russia moved elements of the 8th Combined Arms Army into the breakaway regions, and there's no Ukrainian military there. So when they cross the line of contact to do phase two, that's when contact will be made. The Ukrainians will fight. They're tough. Russia is an overmatch for them, and they will be defeated, but they will absolutely fight. And there's not a lot of quit in them. Listen, when Russia was here in 2014, they wanted to secure more than what they were able to achieve. And they wrote a lesson learned about it. They said we relied too much on unconventional hybrid forces. We should have used more conventional military. So even though the Ukrainian military was nowhere near the size it is today, they displayed a lot of will and put up some resistance. They're tough people, but the military will be defeated. Ukrainian people will never be defeated by Russia.
So the fighting could go on. I mean, I'm just saying there are going to be costs to Putin's, I'm going to call it Putin's adventurism. That's how I see it. The guy has this romanticized, phony picture of history. I mean, the speech he gave the other day was just incredible. But putting that aside, you know, I'm hoping the Ukrainian, whatever happens to Zelensky, he may leave the country, there may be a government in exile, but you're still going to have Ukrainian people on the ground who don't want to be run by Vladimir Putin in Russia. They're going to fight, I suppose. And I was just looking for an assessment here in the, I'll say, the early hours of this invasion.
Yeah, well, the Ukrainian people, if the country's occupied, and listen, that is a major, major task on the part of Russia, and it has huge amount of risks for Russia and consequences for Russia. And you mentioned it. One of them is the people will fight, and will fight as long as it takes to get every Russian soldier off their territory. But you just don't organize an insurgency overnight. It takes time, networks, money, ammunition, organization, leaders, all of that. Putin has calculated that, and I'm sure he's taken that into consideration. He's very familiar with the 9-year involvement in Afghanistan and how that ended. He knows the Ukrainians are very tough and they'll fight them, but he also knows that that will take some time, and he has a way of impacting it if he takes the whole country. You know, there are other risks for Putin here, certainly, too. I mean, the international community, if he actually takes down the entire country, he'll be a pariah for sure. And I think it will have some impact even on his domestic audience, which he's very concerned about. His approval ratings have gone down. You know, there is some resistance in the country among intellectuals, and a number of retired generals like myself who are in Russia are looking at this and saying this makes no sense. This is huge strategic overreach on Putin's part. He's obsessed personally with Ukraine, and he's not thinking clearly about it. So, yes, there's always risk for him as well. We have a tendency to point out the risk for Ukrainians and the challenges we have with this administration in being able to execute a coherent policy. But there's plenty of risk out there for Putin as well.
Last one in our final minute, General Keane. If he takes over if Putin takes over the whole country, comes in, takes Kiev and so forth, Zelensky's government's on the run. You've got, if my geography is decent, Poland, Hungary, and Romania right on the border. They are NATO countries. What are they going to do?
Well, I accept Putin in the vision that he laid out. That what he appears to be doing is looking at the post-Cold War boundaries and reconstructing them, because he believes that the United States led an expansion after the collapse of the Soviet Union into Eastern Europe and NATOized Eastern Europe, so to speak, at the expense of Russian security. And he wants new security arrangements, and believe me, you mentioned NATO countries on the border here, and anybody that thinks that Putin is not, if he takes Ukraine, has Belarus already, that he's not going to intimidate and threaten NATO is misguided. And we have really got to upgun NATO in terms of capabilities and forces. President Trump was absolutely right. We're still a long way from having the kind of capabilities to build an effective deterrence. And the fact is, they're not spending enough money on it. Also, there's an issue of will, as far as I'm concerned, and we've dealt with this before, you and I, Larry, and discussing that. But some good things have happened here. NATO is focused on the Russian threat. That's a good thing. They are coming together much better than they have in the past. But they're a long way from the kind of military capabilities they need to deter Putin as well.
All right, we'll leave it there, General Keane. We thank you, sir, and we'll probably have you back every day on this crisis. But thanks for your advice, as always.